Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of the 10th Planet. Please be aware there are spoilers ahead. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more content. The Doctor, Ben and Polly land near a space observation base in Antarctica in 1986 to witness the return of Earth's long-lost twin planet, Mondas, with its soon familiar inhabitants paying a visit. William Hartnell as an actor was vital to the quick popularity Doctor Who reached during the early 1960s, and a role he was initially reluctant to take on had become something he cherished, protected and owned. After 3 years though, his health had started to play a major influence on his contribution to the show, and although initially resistant, Hartnell came to the realisation it was time to step down. Hartnell's health had already caused rewrites in previous episodes to work around this situation, and the 10th Planet is perhaps one of the best examples of this scenario. Writers Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis had anticipated this in advance, and therefore structured a narrative to give the Doctor a reduced, albeit important, role to the story. Upon the TARDIS landing, and the crew being taken captive by the team in the Snowcap base, the Doctor quickly deduces what is going to happen when observing the appearance of Mondas and the loss of contact with the spaceship Zeus 4. But as ever, with stories of this setup, he is ignored by the majority of the characters who dismiss his theories as rubbish, with the exception of Dr. Barclay. What is also typical is the Doctor being stern and sarcastic to authority types that mock his ideas. Despite his warnings and awareness of what is set to happen, he is kept at arm's length from getting involved in the interactions of the Snowcap crew and the Cybermen upon their arrival. As previously mentioned, the narrative is purposely structured to minimise the Doctor's involvement due to Hartnell's health. However, prior to the recording of episode 3, Hartnell's health meant he couldn't participate, and as such, the Doctor is written out having collapsed, which he later puts down to the effects of Mondas' presence. By episode 4, the Doctor has recovered and once again anticipates the fate of both Mondas and the Cybermen, despite still being fragile, and manages to even buy time for everyone by negotiating with the Cybermen to spare their lives. This turns out to be the Doctor's final involvement, as the effects of Mondas ultimately take its toll on his body, and by the story's conclusion, he hurries back to the TARDIS, where Ben and Polly witness the Doctor regenerate for the first time on TV. Although not the epic send-off that the first Doctor's successors experienced, it is still heroic, in particular in episode 4, and given the circumstances surrounding William Hartnell, is fitting and understandable, if not underwhelming. The 10th Planet feels less of a swan song for the first Doctor and simply a gradual conclusion. William Hartnell carved out the principles of the character of the Doctor and gave it his all to the point where he physically couldn't do it any longer. It is just unfortunate that his health didn't give him the send-off he deserved. The 10th Planet was Ben and Polly's third story, having joined at the end of Season 3 with the War Machines, and subsequently appeared in the Season 4 opener, The Smugglers. Together with the 10th Planet, all of their adventures with the Doctor had taken place on Earth, albeit in 3 different time periods. Despite this, it is implied at the beginning of the 10th Planet that they have travelled beyond Earth and were pleased to be back, and were curious if they could find a way back to England, until the Doctor points out that they are 20 years into their own future. Ben arguably gets his biggest involvement in the 10th Planet than he does in any of his stories. Due to the Doctor's reduced ability, Ben gets the lion's share of the action, in particular in the first half when he manages to turn the Cyberman's weapon on itself, and fundamentally leads the revolt against the wave of the Cybermen attack. The last-minute rewrite of episode 3 to remove Hartnell's involvement meant that a lot of the dialogue initially meant for the Doctor is handed over to Ben, who manages to convince Barclay, who stands in for the Doctor's scientific input, to sabotage the Z-bomb and further work out some of the Cybermen's weaknesses, in particular radiation. Where the Doctor was the one doing the deducing and anticipating the fallout of the events, Ben turned into being the more focal character in ultimately being the hero and heavily contributing in saving the day. Whereas Ben is heavily involved in the resistance of the Cybermen's plot, Polly has a reduced role not too dissimilar to the Doctor, Staying by the Doctor's side for almost the whole story, she is virtually a casual observer, and then tends to the Doctor when he collapses before then becoming an unfortunate stereotypical gender victim of this era of Doctor Who by making cups of tea for the crew of the Snowcap. As previously mentioned, the Doctor negotiates with the Cybermen for Polly to be taken captive, which on the one hand can be viewed as the Doctor protecting her from deadly events, but it could also be viewed that by having her removed from the events portrays an argument of the Doctor feeling that she would be incapable of holding her own from the potential danger of the Cybermen's attack. From the two companions, it is a contrasting tale of Ben being the focal point, but Polly being a mere bystander. The 10th Planet marked the Cybermen's debut in Doctor Who, and the start of a cluster of stories for the remainder of the 1960s, which saw them elevated to the status of one of Doctor Who's most popular adversaries. A lot of the basic principles of the ideologies that make up the Cybermen are presented here in the 10th Planet. Their origins from Earth's twin planet Mondas, their once organic existence to becoming partly robotic and having their emotions removed, and their ideas and visions on Earth, which fundamentally develops here in the 10th Planet out of desperation, with their home planet dying. As much of the basic principles are laid down here, there are some ideas of the Cybermen that have since been toned down or removed in subsequent stories. The initial observation is that their appearance, which is perhaps the most organic looking with their humanoid looking hands, and their heads comprising of material replacing their skin, and mouth also being organic in movement, was slowly replaced. The chest unit and head unit were also a lot more bulky than later designs, but all of this is seemingly done out of budget and time limitations, but at the same time also makes them appear more sinister. The other aspect in this story is that the Cybermen also have individual names, which doesn't necessarily give them individual personalities, but does go towards their overall vulnerability compared to later designs. But once again, this contributes to their threat, manufactured out of their need for survival. As for the story itself, they make an iconic appearance at the end of episode 1, with the first wave of attack, which is eventually held back by the crew of the Snowcap before making a second assault for the finale of the story. I do feel in some ways you are left wanting to see more of them, but overall their presence is something that hadn't been realised at that point in Doctor Who's history from an antagonist viewpoint, and their performance in the 10th Planet shows that there is more to come from them. General Cutler is the leader of operations at the Snowcap base and oversees the monitoring of space activity of the Zeus rockets. Described as being someone who runs a small team and drives to breaking them, it instantly becomes a type of character that blends between protagonist and antagonist. Initially, he is the one leading the dismissing of the Doctor's theories of Mondas and the oncoming threat of the Cybermen, but upon their arrival, forms part of the revolt. Between the first and second wave of Cybermen attacks, he becomes partially involved in the events when his son is set up in one of the Zeus rockets to investigate the disappearance of a previous Zeus rocket, but it comes unhinged when the energy-draining effects of Mondas starts to interfere once again. This makes him act drastically by ordering the Z-bomb to be launched at Mondas and making himself temporarily a second antagonist in the narrative. In the end, Cutler is a typical character device that has been used many times throughout Doctor Who, as someone who becomes an antagonist not necessarily out of being malevolent, but by being desperate and therefore unhinged. The difference here is with the Cybermen's absence in the story, he largely becomes as much as a threat, which is largely overlooked. The 10th Planet was written by Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis. Davis was the script editor at the time, whilst Pedler was a medical scientist and writer who was hired by producer Innes Lloyd as a scientific advisor as a means to bring some hard science to the show. This began with the War Machines, in which Pedler provided additional material to Ian Stewart Black's script. The narrative of the 10th Planet is built around the concept of the Cybermen, which came from Kit Pedler and his concern of the dehumanising of parts and body parts being replaced with artificial pieces and what it might lead to in the future. With this idea forming the basis of the Cybermen, their initial appearance was to be more humanoid, but this proved too difficult, and with the available time and budget allocation, it was scaled back to what we see in the story. For the remainder of the narrative, Pedler and Davis's script is reflective of the space race that was ongoing at the time during the 1960s between the US and Soviet Union, and adds to Pedler's attempts to hardwire the real science element into Doctor Who. Coupled with that scenario, Pedler and Davis, although maybe not intentionally, introduced the base under siege narrative design to Doctor Who by providing a location which is remote as Antarctica. This provides additional tension and suspense to the overall feel of the story. There is also perhaps a conscious attempt by Pedler and Davis to bring an international feel to the characters of the story, with General Cutler being American, as well as the three featured astronauts in the story, Cutler's son, Schultz, and Williams, also having American accents. Williams was originally supposed to be Welsh, but director Derek Martinez changed this as to incorporate a black character into the story, and as such the nationality shifts to American. Additionally, you have Tito, who's either Italian or Italian-American in origin. A similar concept was actually applied to one of Pedler and Davis's later stories, The Tomb and the Cybermen, and is a refreshing change that everyone doesn't sound British that was a feature in British TV at the time. Another obvious notion is that the story isn't led purely by the Dr. Ben and Polly, but treats the guest characters, in particular the ones based at Snowcap, as equals, leading to a spread of characters being handed pieces of the script, which would normally be reserved for the main characters, although a lot of this may have been down to Hartnell's ill health. The last important factor to the 10th planet is what we now all know as the regeneration process, although at the time it didn't have a particular name. As already well documented, Hartnell's ill health, coupled with the show's drop in viewing figures, led to Innes Lloyd trying to think of ways for Doctor Who to carry on without its lead character. In the end, it was Jerry Davis that suggested the concept of the Doctor being able to change his appearance, and with that he brought to the table what is arguably the most essential plot device, which is key to the show's longevity. This also allows for Hartnell's ill health and lack of involvement in particular in this story to become part of the narrative itself, in that the Doctor is suffering from the effects of Mondas' energy draining capabilities, which would ultimately kill off the First Doctor and pave the way for the incoming Second Doctor. Despite all of these fresh and new ideas that are applied to the 10th planet, the narrative does in the end come across as slow, with surprisingly not a lot happening over the 4 episodes, and even to the point of having 2 Cybermen ambushes taking place, which seemingly just allows the story to meet its 4-episode requirement. Despite Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis's obvious talents, you get the impression that the 10th planet was an end product of 2 writers testing new ideas and finding their own feet as working as a writing partnership, as subsequently their later combined efforts tended to supply more substance. The 10th Planet was directed by Derek Martinez, who, although still learning his trade, was already on his 3rd Doctor Who in 12 months, having previously overseen Galaxy 4 and Mission to the Unknown. One noticeable contribution that goes slightly beyond the role of a director in 1960s Doctor Who, in that, as previously mentioned, is the intervention changing the nationality of the character Williams to incorporate black actor Earl Cameron. But there was also, at the time, a seemingly minor alteration to the script that went on to make a big difference. Originally in the script, Hartnell's last line as the Doctor was, "No, no, I simply will not give in." However, due to the available timing for filming, Martinez wanted to ensure that the regeneration scene was filmed as well as possible. As such, Hartnell's last line was, "Ah, yes, thank you. That's good. Keep warm." This is a seemingly lacklustre closing line for the First Doctor, and the inclusion of the original scripted line implies that the Doctor has been holding back the regeneration for some time, with some fan theories claiming that the cause for regeneration started as far back as the conclusion of the previous season story, the Daleks' Master Plan, with the Time Destructor, and that the events of the 10th Planet finally made it happen. This theory in the First Doctor holding back his regeneration was finally addressed in the Peter Capaldi story, Twice Upon a Time, in which the 12th Doctor is also experiencing the same situation, and the two incarnations come face to face and share their pain. While it would have been good to include the original line for the conclusion of the 10th planet, I can see why Derek Martinez sacrificed the line in favour of a focus on the regeneration scene. This highlights Martinez's vision as a director by realising the importance of the regeneration not only to the 10th planet, but the whole future of Doctor Who. The 10th planet was originally broadcasted as 4 episodes from the 8th to the 29th of October 1966, as the second story of Season 4, although it was the first one filmed, as the season opener Smugglers was filmed as part of the production block for Season 3. As we all know, it marked the end of William Hartnell's era of the Doctor, resulting in the first Doctor regenerating into the second Doctor, in a course of action that was decided to ensure the show's survival and longevity beyond William Hartnell's tenure in the role. Needless to say, the action was still a gamble, and it could have backfired had the 10th planet and the remainder of Season 4 not gone down well with the fans. Thankfully, the production team saw the opportunity to change the focus and format of the narratives, in tandem with Patrick Troughton's acting abilities, and to bring about a new persona to the Doctor, while still maintaining a link with the audience. Over the rest of the season, Troughton would have 2 encounters with the Daleks and a rematch with the Cybermen, which would all play their part in the transition and allowing fans to adapt to the Doctor's new incarnation. Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis's creation of the Cybermen also proved their worth and popularity in the production team's search for an antagonist to rival the Daleks' popularity. Although the Cybermen don't exceed the Daleks in stories and popularity, they lay their mark in the 10th planet, would become the dominant adversary for the remainder of the 60s era. One advantage they had over the Daleks was that their appearance was open to dramatic alteration, and the audience would see different designs while still maintaining that Cyberman feel. Additionally, they were also more mobile, which meant that there was plenty of opportunity to use them in different scenarios and settings, while still maintaining a degree of credibility and plausibility. The ability for the Doctor to regenerate has become synonymous with the show, and going forward, an incarnation of the Doctor's last story would go on to act as a full stop to their tenure, with either an epic, all-at-risk storyline such as the War Games, Logopolis or The End of Time, or with a dramatic performance from the actors such as Planet of the Spiders, Caves of Androzani or Twice Upon a Time. With either scenario, the big finale calls time on that approach to the show, as well as with the production team often seizing the opportunity to change the direction of the show with the emergence of a new Doctor. Unfortunately, the 10th planet doesn't end up being either of those due to the experimentation feel of the concept that was to be coined as a regeneration. William Hartnell doesn't get the epic storyline or the heroic send-off, and instead his incarnation merely fades away. The ideologies of the 10th planet, you could argue, don't even represent the first Doctor era when comparing to his earlier works, and everything about it such as the Cybermen, base under siege narrative, isolated locations, and even Ben and Polly would become more synonymous with the Patrick Troughton era, given the notion that the 10th planet is more of a transition piece, setting it up with the fans with what is yet to come. It is unfortunate that William Hartnell doesn't get the send-off he deserves, but understandable given his health and time limitations presented to the production team. As a story itself, the 10th planet I feel is quite laboured, disjointed and drawn out, and at times lacks some of the punch and threat that Cybermen stories would later carry. Also, with Hartnell's reduced role in the story, it is down to Michael Craze and Annika Wills, who play Ben and Polly, and the guest cast, to carry the narrative, with mixed results. But it is also a story of experimentation, primarily with narrative structure, plot devices and characterisation, in particular with the introduction of the Cybermen, all of which pay off and will be built upon over the years, resulting in the 10th planet being a landmark and influential story whose success cemented the future of Doctor Who itself. So, that concludes my review of the 10th planet. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.